صل على محمد وآل محمد. الفاتحة. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. الحمد لله رب العالمين الرحمن الرحيم مالك يوم الدين إياك نعبد وإياك نستعين اهدنا الصراط المستقيم صراط الذين أنعمت عليهم غير المغضوب عليهم ولا الضالين. أعوذ بالله من الشيطان اللعين الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. الحمد لله الذي جعل الحمد مفتاحا لذكري وسببا للمزيد من فضلي ودليلا على آلائه وعظمته، ثم الصلاة والسلام على سيدي ومولاي سيد المرسلين وعلى أهل بيته الطيبين الطاهرين. وصلى الله عليك يا أبا عبد الله، صلى الله عليك وعلى جدك وأبيك، صلى الله عليك وعلى أمك وأخيك، صلى الله عليك يا مولاي يا أبا عبد الله، وعلى الأرواح التي حلت بفنائك. عليك مني سلام الله أبدا ما بقيت وبقي الليل والنهار، ولا جعله الله آخر العهد مني لزيارتكم. السلام على الحسين وعلى علي بن الحسين وعلى أولاد الحسين وعلى أصحاب الحسين. السلام عليكم جميع شهداء كربلاء ورحمة الله وبركاته. أما بعد، فقد قال الله سبحانه وتعالى في كتابه الكريم: بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. يا أيها الذين آمنوا اذكروا نعمة الله عليكم إذ جاءتكم جنود فأرسلنا عليهم ريحا وجنودا لم تروها وكان الله بما تعملون بصيرا. صدق الله العلي العظيم. Inshallah, today we will cover two verses of Surah Al-Ahzab, verse 15 and verse 16, because these two verses, they go together. In these verses, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, at least in verse 15, He states, وَلَقَدْ كَانُوا آحَدُوا اللَّهَ مِنْ قَبْلُ لَا يُوَلُّونَ الْأَدْبَارَ وَكَانَ أَحْدُ اللَّهِ مَسْئُولًا. That these individuals who were weak in their faith, who were fooled by the hypocrites, they had made a covenant with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala from before, meaning before the event of Al-Khandaq, the Battle of Khandaq, that they would not turn back upon their hills, meaning that they would not do what they had done before. وَكَانَ أَحْدُ اللَّهِ مَسْئُولًا. And this ahd, this covenant that one makes with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, it is questioned about, meaning you will be answerable for that ahd or whatever covenant that you make. Verse 16, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He says, قُلْ لَنْ يَنْفَعُكُمْ الْفَرَارُ إِنْ فَرَرْتُمْ مِنَ الْمَوْتِ أَوْ الْقَتْلِ وَإِذًا لَا تُمَتَّعُونَ إِلَّا قَلِيلًا. We mentioned this before, just in explanation. But Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He says it to confirm what we already had stated. Or actually, my statement was more or less giving you a insight before we reach to this verse. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He says that you're fleeing, meaning those individuals who wanted to flee from their task and their test. Those individuals who asked the Prophet of Allah, he says, our houses are exposed, they're vulnerable, so allow us to go back to our homes. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says that such running away and fleeing from your responsibility will not benefit you. To flee from death or to flee from al-qatl. Death, al-maut, means that one dies naturally, and one cannot flee from death. Or qatl, or if one is in a war, and particularly this war with the Rasulullah against those who were the kuffar coming in to attack the Muslims. So Allah says, fleeing from that will not benefit you. وَإِذَنْ لَا تُمَتَّعُونَ إِلَّا قَلِيلًا. And if you did flee, you ran away from that test, you will only enjoy that for a very small amount of time. Meaning that the mata, or the ease that you think, or you're perceiving that there's ease when you run away from that test, he says it's only short-lived. Just as we mentioned the other day, that if we run away from those things which we are supposed to do, those tests that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He puts before us only to make us better, if we run away from them, it'll only be short-lived, because we will run away from that test and we'll face another test. So it is better that we assess the test that is before us, deal with that test that is before us, and rise to the occasion that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has put before us in order to become better human beings, better examples of being a mu'min. One thing that we must clarify in the beginning, one part is historical, that here Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He states that these individuals, they made a covenant with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, that they would not turn back. Ahadu min qablu. This is indicating to the battle of Uhud. And we know that what happened in the battle of Uhud, Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa sallam, when entering into that battle, he told his companions, he told the ummah that he set one flank upon the mountain, upon the hill. He says, do not come off of this mountain, because then we will be attacked from behind. When apparently the war was won in the valley, these individuals came down and say, oh, well, we came to take the spoils of war with us. But as they went down to take the spoils of war, the mushrikeen, they attacked from behind. And this is, or at least part of that idea to come down. Some of the individuals that were part of that, they were part of Bani Salma. And these were, among them, they had some people who were, again, who were weak in Iman. Among them, they were also munafiq. And in many of the tafsirs, they actually mention some of the names of those individuals. But nonetheless, those who continued to remain with Rasulullah after that, they came and they promised. They said, okay, well, either we were fooled, we were those who were weak in Iman, and we were fooled, we were not steadfast, and we did not stay. So this won't happen again to Rasulullah. But here, in the battle of Khandaq, it began to happen again. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, don't you remember? You made an ahd. You made a covenant with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that you wouldn't do this again. But yet you went back. In order for us, in our particular reading of these verses of the Quran, and as we said, our reading is a prescriptive reading. What can we take from these verses? What can we understand from these verses in order to strengthen our iman? The event of Khandaq and how Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He speaks about it. In order to take a prescription and to benefit from these verses, we must understand one of the key words in this verse, and a key word is ahad, covenant. An ahad is similar to another word that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala He mentioned before. There's a slight difference. And that is when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He was explaining about the munafiqeen, or the munafiqun, and those who had an illness in their heart. He said that they made a particular statement. And that statement was, مَا وَعَدَنَا اللَّهُ وَرَسُولُهُ إِلَّا غُرُورًا. That what Allah and His Messenger has promised us is nothing but ghurur, a mirage. There's no reality to it. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, or at least, what is this wa'ad, as we stated? Wa'ad is a promise. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He promised to the believers Jannah, paradise. The Prophet of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, he promised to the believers success. But those who had weakness, they said, oh, whatever Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has promised, whatever the Prophet has promised, this is ghurur, is not real. There's no reality to it. But here Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He says that these individuals, they made ahad. So what is an ahad? And what is wa'ad? And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He says that He never goes against His wa'ad. La yukhlifu Allahu mi'ad. That whatever He promises, He does not go against it. One of the differences between ahad and wa'ad is that wa'ad is a promise from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And this promise, it does not have to be in exchange for something. If Allah promises something just simply because He wants to promise, He wants to reward the believers, that He gives them blessings, He gives them good tidings. An ahd, on the other hand, is a covenant that one makes with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. That an individual, he states that alayya ahdu Allahi kada and af'ala kada. Meaning that I am making a covenant, a pact with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and by me making this pact with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, I will do what I have promised to do. And as long as I do what I promise to do, then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He too will fulfill His promise to me. As one of the areas of Sharia, of Islamic law, an ahd is something that is recommended to do. It's one of those things that are mustahab, that a person, he can make an ahd with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And any ahd, any covenant that one makes with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has basically two aspects about it. One aspect, or two major aspects. One aspect about it is that the ahd has to be verbal. So for example, these individuals who promised Rasulullah that they would not turn back on their heels as they did in the Battle of Uhud, most likely, if Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He's saying that they made this covenant, that they expressed it verbally, that we made a mistake and we will not go back to that mistake. The second aspect about the ahd, and of course, like any action like this in the Sharia, a person has to be baligh, must be mature. That person must do the ahd based on ikhtiyar, meaning their choice. They cannot be forced into the ahd. And so forth and so on. But the other aspect is that if a person breaks that ahd, that covenant, then that person has to pay a penalty, and that is kafara. And they either pay the penalty by freeing a slave, by fasting 2 months consecutively, or by feeding 60 poor people. This is the kafara, the penalty. Much like the penalty that you see that in fasting, if a person intentionally breaks his fast, his or her fast, then the penalty is either you free a slave, you fast 2 consecutive months, or you feed 60 hungry people. This ahad, and I just want to take one aside here, just to talk about this idea of ahd, or making covenants with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Because there's something that is recommended to do. And at least in my experience in various communities, I have noticed something, that there's a similar thing to ahad that is practiced, but unfortunately, what I see, or at least my assessment of it, and I guess maybe you can know better from your upbringing what the reality is, but what I've assessed is that somehow some of the things that we do, and they become tradition, they got divorced of the Sharia, and it just became custom without understanding the actual aspect, or at least the legal aspect of performing these things. And that is when we do niyaz. There's an idea of doing niyaz. Inshallah, salawat. Inshallah, I request that if sisters cannot speak, so, so I think the brothers are getting a bit disturbed. It's difficult for them to hear. So, but anyway, this idea of the nazar, giving nazar. In the act of giving nazar, it in itself and the actions around this, many of the things are recommended to do. That's to feed someone, even if they're believers, even to recite the Fatiha, because usually Fatiha and 3 times Ikhlas is recited over the food, and it is given, or at least the thawab, or the blessings of that is dedicated to one of the imams or the shuhada. These are all good things. These are all very good things. However, when we do those things, only in that realm, in that context, it becomes that we're doing multiple things which are mustahab. But when we make an oath or a covenant, and particularly this concept in the Sharia, and I think afterwards Sayyid, he can explain more about that. This is as a resident alim. But to raise this particular action, because mustahab is good, meaning you get reward for doing it, and if you don't do it, there's no harm. But by converting that action, which is mustahab, into something that is wajib upon you, then the reward is greater. When we make another, when we say, Lillahi alayya kada, that by Allah, I will do this action. To give you one example, if, say for example, I'm planning to sponsor a majlis, as we're sponsoring tonight. So you can make this action wajib upon yourself and get more blessing. Right now it's mustahab, highly, it's very recommended. But if I say that by Allah, on this date, I will give food to the believers, whoever comes to the masjid, whoever comes to the majalis, on that night, I will give them some food, this tabarruk. That action, and of course you can connect it with that, okay, if Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, if He blesses me just to wake up in the morning, on that day I will give this. If He blesses me with some sort of sustenance, if He blesses me with health, or whatever, then I will give this food on this day. And in turn, that action will become wajib for you. And when that action becomes wajib for you, that is more thawab in that than just simply doing an act of mustahab. The value of it goes up. And again, this is, again, where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, again, He wants you to maximize. Again, He makes the task easy. Okay, if you don't want to make it wajib, do it mustahab, there's reward. I'll give you reward. If you want to make it wajib and you make another, then, hey, I'm going to raise the bar a bit so that the reward is even more. But unfortunately, sometimes I see, well, this idea or this concept of making the real nadhr, because another, we get the idea or has become custom that, oh, well, I make the niyaz by doing this, reciting Fatiha and 3 times Surah Al-Fatiha. That's not really nadhr. It has value, yes, mustahab. But if I say that, okay, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, if you allow me to wake up on this particular morning, my name is already there, I will give the niyaz on this day. I will recite the Fatiha and there's 3 times the Ikhlas and then over the food, and then I will give that. That will become much more valuable. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, let me give you one verse in the Quran where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He speaks about ahd and at least making covenants with Him. Because one of the relationships that we can make with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is by doing this, making covenants. Making something that, okay, well, I'm going to do this action anyway. So if I'm going to do this action anyway, why not maximize the reward for that? Unfortunately, we do this for the dunya a lot, especially if we're going to buy a stock or something like that. We want to maximize the return. Why don't we maximize the return on our actions? The law gives us the ability to do so. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He says in the Quran, in Surah Ali Imran, verse 76, He says, وَمَنْ أَوْفَى بِأَهْدِهِ وَاتَّقَى فَإِنَّ اللَّهَ يُحِبُّ الْمُتَّقِينَ. That individual who fulfills his covenant, he makes a pact, he makes a covenant with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, وَاتَّقَى. And he's conscious of that. So first of all, you make a covenant, and when you make that covenant, you become conscious of that covenant, meaning you're becoming conscious of this covenant bringing you closer to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Maximizing your own actions, the investment that you're making in the akhirah. So one of the benefits of covenants is that it instills or it cultivates in you taqwa, consciousness of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And instills in you taqwa. Why? Because, okay, if this action is supposed to happen, I feel, oh, you know what, I'm not going to give it today. Oh, let somebody else do it. But if you make that, no, I'm going to give it, then you must give it. Because by not giving it, you're breaking your covenant with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And breaking that covenant has a penalty. But fulfilling that covenant has greater reward. So that covenant, it instills taqwa, and you could use it to bring taqwa. And then Allah says, what? فَإِنَّ اللَّهَ يُحِبُّ الْمُتَّقِينَ. And as you cultivate in yourself taqwa, then you gain more love for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Allah, He loves you. So, the choice is ours. We can do it in a traditional way, or we can maximize our investment. But unfortunately, also, the same concept, and to some extent, at least one thing I heard, but it's unfortunately, is that, oh yeah, people who say that we should do the nadhr and make it according to the Sharia, says these are the people who are against doing niyaz. Subhanallah, no. And this was a discussion. Someone was singing. I was like, why are you thinking that someone is against niyaz? No, we want you to maximize your investment. Giving the niyaz, everything about it is, it's mustahab. Some people say, okay, well, we do the niyaz closer to alam or this. Okay, you can make niyaz, another, based on the Sharia. I'm going to give this food like this, and I'll give it in this particular place or in that particular place. Subhanallah. And you maximize your investment. One of our great ulama, Allama Hilli, rahmatullah alayh, and this will show you that how Allama Hilli, again, subhanallah, this is one of our great scholars. In fact, it's not much time to go through his whole story, but part of his story so that you will have some understanding. They said because of him and because of his wisdom, because of his hikmah, because of his manners and his way of explaining the madhab of Ahlul Bayt alayhim salatu wasalam, because of him, Iran became Shia. Because when he spoke with Shah Ismail, and he had a discussion with him, Shah Ismail, he became Shia. Everyone in his court became Shia. Then it spread to the rest of Islam, Iran. This is Allama Hilli. But in his lifetime, as he mentioned to one of his students, he says, there's nothing in my life that I did except that it was wajib. He says, every action that I did in my life, it was wajib. And therefore, the reward for every action I did was greater. And so his student, he says, how did you do this? Because he was seeking to teach his student. The student was wondering, how can I gain closeness to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala? He said, make every action wajib. Of course, this, everybody may not be able to do this. But he asks, how is this? How did you do this? So Allama Hilli, he explained, he says, drinking water. What is the ruling on this in Islamic Sharia? He said, it's mubah, meaning it's allowed. By doing it, there's no reward. By not doing it, there's no harm in it. But Allama Hilli, he said what he would do is that he would say that, oh Allah, if you give me the ability, or you continue to give me the ability, this as an example, to even pick up this glass, meaning that my hand doesn't become weak where I can't pick up this glass, if I have that ability to pick up this glass, then I will drink this water. So therefore, he made another, that it becomes incumbent upon me to drink this water. Or another way that he would do is that Allah, if I drink this water, then I will make incumbent upon myself salawat. So again, in the action of salawat, it's mustahab. But by doing this, he made the salawat wajib upon himself, just for that one time. So he said that everything I did, I made it wajib. So therefore, my reward was greater. And by doing so and abstaining from what is haram, then one will connect to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. One will cultivate taqwa, piety. One will cultivate his or her relation with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Salawat. But understanding that the relationship, or one aspect of the relationship between Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and his servant and his creation, is through ahd. The particular ahd, covenant that we make in the Sharia, that I will make something that is mustahab, wajib upon us. But there's also another ahd that we have, and this is a general ahd, covenant that we've made with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Our souls have made with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, he explains this in the Quran when he states, Alam a'had ilaykum ya bani Adam alla ta'budu shaytan innahu lakum aduwwun mubin. The O children of Adam, have I not made a covenant with you? Not to worship shaitan, not to submit to shaitan, not to fall into the traps and the deception of shaitan. Surely he is a clear enemy for you. This is an ahd that we made. We made this ahd in Alam al-Dhar. When Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, he had all of the souls before him. All of your souls, my souls, the soul of all of the creation. And he asks, Alastu bi rabbikum? Qalu bala. Am I not your Lord? And the soul said, yes. This is a covenant that we made with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. This is a covenant that our souls made. The very covenant that each and every prophet and imam, when they were sent to this world, to remind us of this covenant. That covenant which, if we dug deep enough to our fitrah, our innate self, we would understand that covenant. And like any covenant, we must fulfill that covenant. We made the ahd. And if we go against that covenant, there's a penalty. If we fulfill that covenant, there's a reward. Because the ahd is a conditional promise. That you fulfill your part of the bargain, your part of the covenant, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He will fulfill His part of the covenant. Just as Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He says that He has purchased the souls and the wealth of the believers, بِأَنَّ لَهُمُ الْجَنَّةِ. That you fulfill your covenant and you obey Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And do not worship shaitan, meaning don't fall into his traps and his deception. Do not allow him to take you off of the path of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Because this covenant, again, like every covenant, you will be questioned about it. As Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He says here, وَكَانَ أَهْدُ اللَّهِ مَسْئُولًا. Allah will ask that you made this covenant. How did you fulfill this covenant? And again, when we look at this covenant, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, subhanAllah, He helps us at every moment. And just last night, one of the brothers, he was mentioning that how one of the du'as or the statements of Fatima Zahra salamullah alayha, how she thanks Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala for reminding her to thank Allah. SubhanAllah. That she gives shukr. Ashkuruk ya Allah. And she gives thanks to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has reminded her to thank Him. What greater creator do you want than that? Likewise, in our covenant to Him, that we claim that, and we said, and we made that pact and covenant with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, that we will worship Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, that we will obey Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, that we will recognize Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala as our creator, then He sent for us a reminder. He sent for us prophets. He sent for us imams. He sent for us books. So there's no excuse to say that, oh, well, there was nothing to remind me of this covenant. No, we were reminded of this covenant. And this is why the Prophet of Allah sallallahu alaihi wasallam he also considers his teaching of the Quran, his delivering of the Quran as a covenant. It's a type of ahd. And he says that he will be questioned about it, whether he delivered or not. And he says, and you will be questioned about it, whether you've received it, whether you have read it, whether you have implemented and acted upon that Quran. Because you will be asked about that covenant. You will be asked about your actions. And this is why in this world and in this moment that we must understand this covenant, must understand our task before us, the tests that are before us, and pass those tests. In one of the narrations from Imam Sadiq alayhi salatu wasalam, it's a very beautiful narration. Inshallah, perhaps help us put this idea of a covenant in perspective and how to focus on this covenant that we have with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. In this narration, the Imam, he tells to one of his companions the interaction between the Prophet Musa and Khidr. Of course, part of that story is in the Quran, but then the Imam, he's explaining a few of the details that are not there in the Quran. He says, there was a dialogue between Hazrat Musa and Khidr. And in that dialogue, Khidr, he told Hazrat Musa, and subhanAllah, you see that this Musa, he's not just an ordinary prophet. Musa is ulul azm. Khidr was not ulul azm, but he is a prophet, and he has a special relationship with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. That the revelation that Khidr he receives is particularly for him. Hazrat Musa, on the other hand, as ulul azm, has revelation, that he has a responsibility to deliver that revelation to the entirety of mankind. That's what ulul azm means. Means that his revelation was not simply for one group of people, one tribe, one area, but his revelation was to be spread in the entire world. His law was to be spread in the entire world. That is Musa. But yet, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala sent this prophet to Khidr to get advice. And of course, the prophet Musa, he knows himself, but reminders are good. So Khidr, he tells Musa, he says, Inna aslaha ayyamaka amamak. He says, the best of your days and the most righteous of your days are the days before you. Meaning tomorrow. The day after tomorrow. And of course, this reminder is really for us. That if we have not fulfilled our covenant as we should have, then the best of days are before you, because from tomorrow, inshallah, that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala give us all life to see tomorrow, that from tomorrow, this could be the best of your days. فَإِنَّ أَصْلَحَ أَيَّامَكَ أَمَامَكَ فَانْظُرْ أَيُّ يَوْمٍ هُوَ. He says, so look to tomorrow, look to that next day, and see what day it is. Recognize and realize the value of that day. That Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has given you another day to live in order to fulfill that covenant. In order to fulfill that covenant, so you will not have to pay the penalty. Because some of the ahd is also, when you make a covenant, even in the Sharia, you can make the covenant very general. Okay, well, if tomorrow I wake up healthy, then I'm going to feed the believers. When do you feed them? You haven't specified which day. So you can choose any day to fulfill it. But of course, the sooner you fill it, the better. So your best of days are before you. That you have another chance to fulfill that covenant of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Not to follow the deception of shaitan. To worship Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala as you should worship. To follow the Prophet as you should follow. To read the Quran, understand the Quran as you should understand the Quran. The best of days before you. Recognize the value of that day. فَعَدَّ لَهُ الْجَوَابِ. Then Khidr, he tells Musa, he says, and prepare for that day and answer. Prepare for that day and answer. Because on Yawm al-Qiyamah, at least as some of the riwayats, when it explains the details of Qiyamah, and this is why Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, he says, no servant will be oppressed. If a servant is oppressed, he's oppressed himself by not following the covenant. Have a response for your day. Because Yawm al-Qiyamah, it will be a great task. But at that point, the test is over. The grading of the test starts. And we know how sometimes that when we're taking the GRE or GMAT or trying to get into med school and we take that very difficult test, or was it the MCAT? We're taking these tests and okay, we studied some, but of course when we get there, we see all these problems. How do I solve this? We finally get through it, but that's when the real anxiety begins. Did I pass this test or didn't I pass this test? And you're waiting for the answer. And sometimes you're waiting for the answer so much you keep checking it every hour. Did it come yet? Did it come yet? Did it come yet? What is? Yawm al-Qiyamah will be that moment, but on a much greater scale. And that's when we'll find out, did we pass this test or not? And this is why Khidr, he says, prepare for that day, each day. Prepare a response. And according to some riwayat, there's a response for every hour, every minute, and every second of the day. And of course, subhanAllah, this is how beautiful the guidance of Ahlul Bayt is. There are books, actually, Jamal al-Usbu', book by Sayyid ibn Tawus. And subhanAllah, in this book, of course, maybe we may not be able to fill all of these things, maybe some of the things if we get time in our day. Again, it's all about finding balance. Don't go overboard and sit and do du'as and miss your work and these type of things. But again, don't leave these things to the side. But this book, Jamal al-Usbu', is a compilation of du'as from the Ahlul Bayt for every day of the month, for every hour of the day. I mean, even some of them breaks it down to almost every minute. SubhanAllah, this is to help you to pass a test, to fulfill that covenant, that to this precision, we have been given guidance. So we don't have issues. So, if I'm to do worship, of course, aside from the 5 prayers of the day, I didn't know what to do in this hour, so I just sat back and, I went to some place that I shouldn't have been going to, or I've been engaged in something I should not have been. No, you could have been reciting a dua for that hour or a second, or something, having some sort of reminder to keep you away from things which are haram. Then Khidr, he continues, he says, فَإِنَّكَ مَوْقُوفٌ مَسْئُولٌ, because you will be stopped and you will be asked on Yawm al-Qiyamah. وَخُذْ مَوْعِظَتَكَ مِنَ الدَّهْرِ وَمِنْ أَهْلِ, and take your advice from the past, from each period of time. Take their advice. And subhanAllah, as we see, the reason why the Quran has so many stories, because in the time of Rasulullah, all of the ills of the past, all of the ills of the nations of Saleh, the Prophet Saleh, of the Prophet Ibrahim, of the Prophet Lut, of the Prophet Musa, the Prophet Isa, they all existed during his time and even during our time. He says, look what happened to them. Look what happened to those who are righteous and the promise that they received. Look what happened to those who are wicked and the punishment they received. Take your advice from this. Take your advice from each time period. Then he says, فَعَمَلْ كَأَنَّكَ تَرَى ثَوَابَ عَمَلَكَ. He says, and then act. Act as if you see the reward for your actions. Act in a manner that you see that when you do something that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is pleased with, that what reward you will reap from that. Abstain from those actions that you see that by doing that action, what punishment you will get. By not acting in that way, by not understanding your covenant with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in that way, looking and seeing each action you do, what is its reward? What is its punishment? We forget our covenant and we fall into sin. You fall into an action that those who stood against Imam Hussein fell into. That at every moment they rejected the guidance of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. They rejected the dua of Imam Hussein. He says, you've killed my family, you've killed my companions. Allow me to go and I will make dua that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala forgives you. But they rejected that. Even in Kufa, And in Sham, they rejected the guidance from Imam Zayn al-Abidin, alayhi salatu wasalam. It's said that in some narrations that the Imam in Sham, he said that even at this point, as I am the Waliullah, that I am the Imam that's in the earth, I still can offer you forgiveness. But that was also rejected. It was rejected, and the Ahlul Bayt, they remained in prison in Sham. And there are different stories that they remained in prison for a year, and then they went back to Karbala on the 40th. Another narration says that no, they remained in Sham for some time, but then they were able to return back to Karbala on the 40th, on the Arba'een of the Shahadat of Imam Hussein. And as the caravan was being taken out of Sham, the orders were given to take them back to Medina. But as the caravan was moving, as it was leaving from the outskirts of Sham, there was a voice that cried out. And according to some narrations, this was the voice of Zainab al-Kubra, salamullah alayha. She told the one who was heading the caravan, Murra alayna, murra bina, ala Karbala, that yes, you can take us back to Medina, but take us back to Medina through going through Karbala. Take us to Karbala first. Nuhib an-nuzur, akhina Hussein, that we love. We want to visit one more time our brother Hussein. We want to visit those who we have lost. So the caravan, it went towards Karbala for the Arba'een of Imam Hussein. Karbala, where they stayed for 3 days, mourning Imam Hussein and the Shuhada of Karbala. It is narrated that when the caravan reached to Karbala, that there were some companions who were in Karbala already, some of the Bani Hashim. One of those companions was Jabir ibn Abdullah Ansari, and other groups from Bani Hashim. Among those individuals who were also there was Salma. They were there to mourn and cry for Imam Hussein. And when the caravan reached to Karbala, it stated, it was reported that when they looked upon the plains of Karbala, that the sands were still red from the blood of the Shuhada. That when they reached to Karbala, as they came closer and closer, the mourning for Imam Hussein became louder and louder. That anyone who reached that land to visit Imam Hussein, that they were mourning and weeping for Imam Hussein. Everyone, every being was mourning for Imam Hussein. Even one of the reports, and Salma, she stated this, that in Karbala, that if you were there on the Arba'een, you could hear even the jinns mourning for Imam Hussein, subhanallah. That the jinn were mourning for Imam Hussein. And it stated that some people actually, they went out at night just to hear the jinns mourn for Imam Hussein. And among those mournings for Imam Hussein was the statement by some of the jinn, Aya ya 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 ayna فانحملا بجهد. That these eyes, that they are crying profusely for Hussein. These eyes are crying profusely. فمن يبكي على الشهداء بعدي. And who will cry like this for the shuhada after me? Subhanallah, that the jinn, that they were claiming that they were crying so much that no crying could compare to their crying. فمن يبكي على الشهداء بعدي على رحط تقودهم منايا. They said that they were crying because in Karbala, when Imam Hussein and his companions, they were all martyred and they fell to the ground, that the caravan of Imam Hussein, that the women and children of Imam Hussein, that they were taken away from here. They were taken to Sham and they were taken to Kufa as prisoners. They were taken to meet their fate and even some to meet their death. Who were those who were met their death in the trip, in this caravan that Imam Hussein's that was taken? There were some who came and yes, they began to try to free the Ahlul Bayt. But among the Ahlul Bayt, there was one who died in that trip, in that imprisonment, and that was Ruqayya bint al-Hussein. So even the jinn, they were crying for Ruqayya bint al-Hussein, Ruqayya who was trapped in the dungeons of Yazid. And then at one point she saw Imam Hussein in her dream and she woke up crying. She woke up saying, Abi al-Hussein, where's my father Hussein? She woke up crying, Abi al-Hussein. And when Yazid's men, they heard this, and Yazid heard, he says, what is this clamor? What is going on in the dungeons? And they said that Ruqayya bint al-Hussein, she's asking for her father. It said that Yazid, he said, take this head and you take to her father. So the head of Imam Hussein was taken to Ruqayya. And some say that it was covered up. And when Ruqayya, she lifted the cover off of the head of her father, she looked down at her father and she began to say, Ya abata, man alladhi khadhabaka bidama'ik. Subhanallah. She began to ask that, oh my father, who has dyed your head, who has dyed your hair with blood, man alladhi خذبك بدمائك يا أبتا من الذي قطع رويدك. Oh my father, who is the one who has cut your head? Who is the one who has cut your throat, my father? يا أبتا من الذي أيتمني على صغر سني. Tell me, my father, who is the one who has made me an orphan at this young age? يا أبتا من بقي بعدك نرجو. Tell me, my father, after you, who should I depend upon? Who should I have hope in? يا أبتا من اليتيم حتى تكبر. Oh my father, tell me, who will take care of this orphan girl? Who will take care of her until she grows into a woman? And at this point it is said that Ruqayya, she bent down to kiss the head of her father, and she bent and she was crying above the head of her father. And then Imam Zain al-Abidin, he saw that his niece, that his sister, that she was leaning over the head of Imam Hussein and she was not moving. And then Imam Zain al-Abidin, he told to Zainab al-Kubra, he says, خُذُ الْيَتِيمَ عَنْ عَبِيِّهَا, that pick Ruqayya up, wake her up. And then when Zainab, salamullah alayha, she went to wake Zainab, Ruqayya up, she said, Ruqayya is not asleep, قَدْ مَضَاتْ حَيَاتُهَا, that she is dead, she has lost her life of mourning for her father. قتيلا وشهيدا إنا لله وإنا إليه راجعون وسيعلم الذين ظلموا أي منقلب ينقلبون. اللهم بحق هذه المجلس الحسينية اغفر ذنوبنا واستر عيوبنا وقضي حوائجنا واشفي مرضانا وارحم أمواتنا وعجل فرج مولانا صاحب العصر والزمان واجعلنا من أعوانه وأنصاره والمستشهدين بين يديه وتحت لوائه بحق محمد وآل بيته الطيبين الطاهرين. معتم حسين.
ولم تبخل وما كنت كاذبا ولا استجبان من عطاك الجواب